request all of you to please keep your mobile in silent mode. Thank you.
Hello, check, 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 check. কথা mic test.
Testing. Thank you. বলা হয়ে গেছে তাও নেই বলেছি অলরেডি 5 মিনিট আগে। হ্যাঁ।
বলবেন না
হুম,
একটু দূর থেকে যেন
আচ্ছা
হাওয়াটা বেশি না না ভরভর
দেখে নিন।
ঠিক আছে আপনি বলুন দেখি
হ্যালো,
আর একটু সামনে আসুন।
ঠিক আছে। হ্যালো, হ্যালো, ঠিক আছে।
যখনই মানে বলবেন যে হাওয়াটা বেশি না 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 ফ্যার 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 ফ্যার।
আওয়াজ হতে থাকে,
আপনি হয়তো বুঝতে পারবেন না যখন
শোনা যাবে। আচ্ছা। A very good morning to one and all present here. A most cordial welcome to this Platinum Jubilee flagship event, organized as part of the grand 75th anniversary celebrations of IIT Kharagpur. Today, we are truly privileged to host an exclusive interactive session titled The Art of Doing Economic Reforms, featuring Shri Sanjeev Sanyal, Honorable Member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Prime Minister and one of the nation's most eminent economists. Sir, we are profoundly honored to have you with us today. We extend our warm greetings and heartfelt gratitude to our BSMS economic students, PhD scholars, and public policy students of IIT Kharagpur, as well as the students and esteemed faculty members from several prominent institutes who have traveled across the city to join us. We would like to convey our special thanks to our Honorable Director for entrusting the economics fraternity with the opportunity to host this landmark gathering. We are eagerly anticipating a rich, insightful exchange on policy, economic history, and the strategic road ahead for India. I now take this opportunity to invite our distinguished dignitaries on stage. Head of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, IIT Kharagpur, Professor Jitendra Mahakud. Dean Alumni Affairs, Professor Siddharth Mukhopadhyay. Honorable Director of IIT Kharagpur, Professor Suman Chakraborty. And our esteemed chief guest, Shri Sanjeev Sanyal. To mark the auspicious beginning of today's event, we follow our tradition of seeking the blessings of the divine. May I request the dignitaries to offer flowers to Ma Saraswati, who is considered as the epitome of wisdom and knowledge. Yeah. I also request our esteemed chief guest and dignitaries to grace the lamp lighting ceremony. As a token of our reverence, may I now request our students to present floral bouquets to greet our guests on the stage. Our chief guest, Shri Sanjeev Sanyal. Our Honorable Director, Professor Shuman Chakraborty. Dean of Alumni Affairs, Professor Siddharth Mukhopadhyay. And Head of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Professor Jitendra Mahakud. To formally open the session, may I request our Dean of Alumni Affairs, Professor Siddharth Mukhopadhyay, to deliver the opening welcome address.
Shri Sanjeev Sanyal ji, our director, Professor Chakraborty, Professor Jitendra Mahakud, head of the economics department, distinguished guests, faculty, students, I can see a lot of them. It fills my heart to see an auditorium full of students. A very good morning and welcome to this program. This program is a part of our Platinum Jubilee celebrations, and we are doing a large number of programs of various types around our foundation day, the 18th of August, 2026. We are in fact doing a 1 week full of programs just following this. And there are a couple of principles that we have followed while we have formulated these programs. So one of the principles is that our programs are, of course, celebrations. They are celebrations of not only IIT Kharagpur, but of the IIT system, which is one of the most successful global brands of independent India, if I may say so. But it is not just a celebration. It is not just looking into the history. Every celebration has been planned with a purpose and looking into the future. And they are very themed to cover all aspects of what we do and what we are likely to do going forward towards the 100-year celebration of independent India. And so this program is very, very valuable to us, and thank you, sir. Thank you. I mean, it's very sincere thanks because these opportunities, it's an opportunity for us, this event today. It's an opportunity for, let's say, students to see that economics is really out there in the real world, out of books. Or it's for the faculty. It's probably to give ideas about impactful research, with economics. We have a large number of faculty here. For the department, for the institute, it's an occasion to reflect back on what we can really do. We have economics is one of our most, it is one of our youngest departments, and we need to, chart a course. So these are occasions for us to actually reflect on how we can make an impact, particularly given our circumstances that we are with technology, we are with policy, we are with business, we are with computing, with AI, with data science. So we have a huge environment where we can really leverage economics for, any unit you can think of. It can be a town, it can be a city, it can be a state, or it can be our country. So these, I take this function in that way, and I really thank Mr. Sanyal to have, sparred these thoughts. So I would say so please take part in this initiative. Please do think that how we can take these discussions forward, and that has already started. So rather, I would not take much more time, because you are all waiting for more interesting things to hear. So once again, thank you all. I know what effort has been made by the students and the faculty to be here today. So thank you all for here, and I hope you will enjoy it, and this event will be very purposeful. Thank you, sir, once again. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mukhopadhyay, for setting the stage for today's event. Next, I respectfully invite our Honorable Director, Professor Shumon Chakraborty, sir, to deliver his welcome address.
Good morning, and I welcome all of you to this extremely timely and what I would imagine a very high impact Platinum Jubilee interactive session with none other than Shri Sanjeev Sanyal, who will be deliberating on a topic, the art of doing economic reforms. We are extremely thankful to Shri Sanyal, and you all know how busy and how important he is in his capacity as a member of the Economic Advisory Council to the Honorable Prime Minister of India, and of course in many other committees and capacities that he serves for the nation. I thank Professor Siddhartha Mukhopadhyay, the Dean Alumni Affairs, Professor Jitendra Mahakud, currently the head of the Humanities and Social Science Department, and we have started mentioning this as head of the Economics Department. We believe it is going to happen at any point of time. And distinguished guests, colleagues, students, and some of the distinguished alumni whom I also see here. As we celebrate the Platinum Jubilee of IIT Kharagpur, it is only befitting that we host conversations that are not only commemorating our 75 years of excellence, but rather about imagining the next several years of nation building. And we are curating all our special lecture series from that viewpoint. And in that way, today we are honored to welcome one of the India's foremost public intellectuals, policy thinkers, and reform architects. Shri Sanjeev Sanyal has consistently demonstrated that economic reforms are not simply about changing policies. Sometimes we from outside imagine that the personalities who are in the helm of the national policies, they think in certain way, but his writing and policy contributions combine many things: economics, history, heritage, systems thinking, and institutional design, and all blended into a uniquely Bharatiya framework for national transformation. Sir, your presence today adds enormous significance to our Platinum Jubilee celebration, and in fact, this is the first lecture of this series that we are hosting in this Foundation Day month. 75 years ago, IIT Kharagpur was established to produce engineers who would rebuild independent India. But today, our national challenge has become far more complex. We are no longer there to just build up bridges. We are more mandated to build up ecosystems, not just designing machines or solving isolated engineering problems, but interconnected national systems. All of you are aware of the semiconductor mission of our nation. It is not just about semiconductor design and fabrication. Many people in the field would believe like that. But it is about many other things connected, like global supply chains, critical materials, venture capitals, industrial policy, workforce development, geopolitical resilience, and regulatory architecture. So many of these are connected. Similarly, in all areas, be it climate resilience, healthcare, urban mobility, digital governance, defense, space, what and what not. So, from our common impression, we realize that while technology creates possibilities, economics creates incentives, business creates scale, public policy creates enabling framework, and governance delivers impact, unless all of them work together as a common engine, the transformational ideas would remain just confined to labs or policy documents. They will never be materialized, and that is where today's conversation matters the most. I had the opportunity of having a glimpse to the presentation desks of Shri Sanyal, and in that way, first disclaimer is that I do not understand much of the subject, but still I tried to draw synergy with what all of us have learned in our engineering education. He reminds us about the great reforms that are often not dramatic revolutions. We often talk about dramatic revolutions. So these are carefully designed process reforms. Begin with understanding the systems, how they actually operate, and then eliminating some of the redundant steps, integrating institutions and redesigning workflows before introducing digital technology. And I was thinking that is it not the same what we engineers also do when we conceive about some transformation and when we try to make that happen? So that remarkable convergence of thinking like an engineer and implementing in a governance framework makes this an exceptional platform for people from technology and people not from technology per se to be here and enjoying the deliberations. As a nation, we have demonstrated to the world that we can build world-class digital public infrastructure. But if we look into our future, we will realize that the future will hinge on better institutions capable of developing technology not just rapidly but responsibly and inclusively. AI, quantum technologies, advanced manufacturing, climate technologies, space, defense, personalized healthcare technologies, so many of these, they will depend a lot on their success on institutional leadership. And this brings me to a proposition that I would like to place before Shri Sanyal, before he comes and gives his talk. As a part of Platinum Jubilee of IIT Kharagpur, I believe that a time has come to establish a national center of excellence which converges technology, economics, business, planning, public policy, and mathematical and computational foundations. If we can actually do all these, I think the real synergy will come. Just not another academic center or not another policy institute, a place where engineers work alongside economists, AI researchers collaborate with public administrators, business leaders work with policymakers, behavioral scientists engage with mathematicians and technologists, and planners interact with startup founders. Legal scholars co-design digital regulatory frameworks. And this would be a dream place, and I would give my humble submission to Shri Sanyal to guide us to develop such a unique center of excellence. Imagine such a center becoming Bharat's lab for governance innovation, a place where ministries bring difficult policy challenges, where states co-create implementation frameworks. For example, we at the research park or maybe our Kharagpur campus, whatever we are doing, we can co-create with the government of West Bengal. We have outstanding capabilities in terms of human resources, and what we need is a delicate and well-balanced amalgamation of technology, economics, enterprise, and governance into a coherent innovation ecosystem. This kind of mission can make our future truly transformative, and envisioning that will make Bharat not only the world's innovation leader, but also the most agile, evidence-driven, and implementation-ready governance ecosystem. As we celebrate our Platinum Jubilee, we are reminded that institutions endure not because they preserve the past, but because they can continuously reinvent the future. Because the defining innovation of the coming decades may not simply be a breakthrough technology, it may well be a breakthrough in how nations govern, collaborate, innovate, and transform. With these few words, I would, of course, hand it over to Shri Sanyal for delivering his talk. But as a customary introduction, I need to speak something about him. And friends, you all know that there are personalities who need absolutely no introduction. He is one such individual. Individuals whose ideas move beyond books and classrooms into institutions, public policy and national transformation. You cannot find these kinds of insights in any textbook. And our distinguished speaker today is one such individual. Shri Sanyal is presently a member of the Economic Advisory Council of the Honorable Prime Minister with the rank of the Secretary of the Government of India and the Chancellor of the Gokhale Institute of Politics and Economics, one of the oldest and most distinguished institutions in economic thought. Before assuming these positions, he served for 5 years as the Principal Economic Advisor to the Ministry of Finance, where he was deeply involved in some of the most significant policy initiatives that we are currently seeing to bear the fruit. He has represented our country at the OECD, G7, and the co-chair of the G20 Framework Working Group, helping shape India's voice in the global economic discourse. However, I thought that, I got a 1.5 page narrative of, what were his positions, and then I thought that, these are great positions, but these do not actually define this outstanding personality. These only tell a part of the story. He, in the truest sense, is a systems thinker. In engineering, we love those people who are systems thinkers. Someone who seamlessly connects economics with many other aspects, and in particular civilizational wisdom with contemporary statecraft. During the last decade, therefore, he has been among the key architects behind India's reform journey. From the cleanup of the banking sector, the liberalization of sunrise sectors such as drones and geospatial mapping. I am mentioning this because there are technology students and faculty members who work on these topics and are present here, but they may not be knowing that behind the scene what was his role in many of the transformative initiatives which impacted these areas. Numerous administrative and process reforms and a part of the core team that steered the Indian economy through the unprecedented challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic. His work has consistently reflected one central philosophy, that lasting national transformation comes not merely from just bold ideas, but from better designed institutions and better executed processes, not on individuals. What makes this kind of contribution particularly remarkable is this bridge between theory and practice. Before entering public service, Shri Sanyal spent more than 2 decades in international financial markets, eventually becoming the managing director and global strategist at the Deutsche Bank after serving as a chief economist for South and Southeast Asia. And because of such experience, he brings to public policy an unusually rich combination of global financial experience, strategic thinking, and deep understanding of our nation's own developmental aspirations. And his intellectual influence has been the mastermind, but it extends far beyond what we think as simple governance. He is one of the most widely read Indian authors of our generation. I am sure many of you have read some of these. The landmark texts like The Ocean of Churn, The Land of the Seven Rivers, India in the Age of Ideas, The Incredible History of the Indian Ocean, Revolutionaries, several others. I am not really competent enough to give the full list. But what I would imagine that his writings have received not just numerous national honors, his celebrated works in many of these which have been reported are being adapted into a different masterclass series like Amazon Prime series, bringing one of the defining chapters of India's freedom movement to an even wider audience, that revolutionaries. What I personally feel and find most inspiring is that Shri Sanyal does not stop at writing just history. He aims to recreate that with his imagination. And driven by his passion for experimental archaeology, he conceived and oversaw the reconstruction of INSV, Kaundanya, right? A 5th century Indian stitch ship. Just he had a presentation of that in Jadavpur University, I think just one day back, which was built using completely ancient technologies. And he then joined the Indian Navy crew in sailing the vessel from Porbandar to Muscat, demonstrating through evidence, not merely assertion, the remarkable transoceanic capabilities of ancient Indian shipbuilding. And this is not a subject that he has learned from textbooks, definitely. And perhaps these kinds of things is what makes Shri Sanjeev Sanyal such a compelling public intellectual. He is equally comfortable discussing macroeconomics, and maritime history. And in fact, in one day difference, one talk on one of these subjects in Jadavpur University and another talk in IIT Kharagpur on completely two different areas, it shows that how he can connect process engineering and public administration, urban futures and ancient trade routes, institutional reform and civilizational identity. He reminds us that nations become great not simply by accumulating wealth, but by continuously improving the quality of their ideas, their institutions, and eventually the execution. This afternoon, we have the privilege of listening not just to someone who has observed India's reform journey, but to someone who has helped design, influence, and implement many of the tidbits, so to say. So friends, it is with immense pleasure and great honor that I invite our Platinum Jubilee distinguished guest, Shri Sanjeev Sanyal, to deliver his address on the art of doing economic reforms. Sir, the podium is yours.
Laptop or laptop class? Presentation ta loaded. Laptop is already uploaded. Laptop.
এই চেয়ারগুলো এখানে কাউকে ছড়িয়ে দিতে পারলে ভালো দেখা যায়।
আলোটা নিয়ে লাইটটা অফ করে কমিয়ে দিন নাও দিয়ে দিন প্রেজেন্টেশনটা সুইচ অন সুইচ অন দ্য প্রেজেন্টেশন প্রেজেন্টেশনটা কলার মাইক হয়ে গেছে এখন প্রেজেন্টেশন ঠিক আছে প্রেজেন্টেশনটা দিই অ্যান্টনি এটাতেই চলে যাবে বাট ইউ গিভ মি দ্য প্রেজেন্টেশন আর চেয়ারগুলো সরিয়ে দিন আপনি চেয়ারগুলো সরিয়ে এটা করে দিন দ্যাট ইজ মোর ইম্পর্টেন্ট
You can also.
জাস্ট একটা সরিয়ে দেবে Let's do it myself. That's much faster. Yeah. Okay, that's good. If we can lower the light, I don't need light. Light ta কমিয়ে দিন. Thank you. Okay, that's good. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. How are you doing today? Looking good? Okay. So let me begin first of all by thanking IIT Kharagpur for bringing me to their new campus or new facility. It's not entirely a campus, but it's a fabulous facility, and I'm very pleased to see this hall. I've never been here before. So it's my first time, so let me thank the director, the faculty, the students, and the alumni of IIT Kharagpur for inviting me here today. Eta thak, kichu hobe na. So the topic I'm going to speak about today is about the art of doing economic reforms. Now, many of you obviously read about it in newspapers. I'm sure everybody has a pet theory about what needs to be reformed. But the idea here is to give you a flavor about how policies are actually changed, how reforms are actually done, and the effort that goes into each one of these reforms. Now, there are obviously literally many, many types of reforms, economic and otherwise, that need to be done. But the key thing to remember, and here, is that while there are many, many types of reforms, and just a second, I would like somebody to help me put this on the screen. I can't see the presentation on screen. Yeah, while there are many, many different kinds of reforms, most of the time, the reforms that you see talked about in newspapers, etc., are very large structural reforms. These are not the run-of-the-mill reforms. These are the big structural reforms, such as the introduction of GST, the introduction of the insolvency and bankruptcy code, the changing our entire monetary architecture to make it inflation targeting, and so on and so forth. And it's not surprising, these are the very big reforms, so naturally these are the reforms you mostly will hear about, they'll be on the front page and so on. But most of the time, the reforms we do are much more boring. They tend to be some rule number 43, subsection D, 3 words have to be changed. So the life of a reformer is most of the time about doing those reforms. Not only because if I had to keep doing structural reforms, after all, what are structural reforms? They change the structure of whatever that activity is. So when I introduce the GST, I have changed the structure of how indirect taxes work in the country, right? When I introduce the insolvency bankruptcy code, I change the way creative destruction happens in the country. When the original 1991 reforms happened, it changed the structure of how the economy functions. You move from a socialist planned system to a market-based system. But most of the time, you don't want to do such disruptive reform. It's not only chaotic, but as I will hopefully show you, it's not even necessary, because much of what we need to do is actually much more limited, and that is what we do. So much of reform is actually the nuts and bolts reform, what we call process reforms. Sadly, not even academia, not even the economics departments usually pay very much great attention to them, even though this is what maximum part of reforms are really about. It's about these small sectoral nuts and bolts. Very often, if they are mentioned at all, you'll find them in the 5th page, one small column, and people outside that little area probably do not even heard about that change. But this is what reforms really look like. And I'm going to really talk about these not very well-known nuts and bolts reforms today. So before doing that, I'll just take you through some very basic framework of thinking about this. Bear with me, and you will see that I will illustrate it later, so you don't have to memorize this, but just so that you know that when you change reforms in any large system, there is actually a way of framework of thinking about them. If you have a management school, if you have attended one, you will know, you would have probably studied something called business process reengineering. Oddly enough, no public administration or economics course teaches you a course on government process reengineering, even though all of us complain about this. So here is a very basic system of doing this. The first thing you do, obviously, is to identify something that you think needs reforms. You may think that it needs too much time, maybe because it's too expensive, or there's a much better way of doing something where no process exists. Whatever it is, you first identify clearly an area that needs reform. The next step, which is often not done, is to actually simply map out the as-is process, i.e., how does it exist today? So if it is a body that you don't think should exist, you need to reform it in some fashion, you need to first figure out the institutional architecture, what is it that you need to reform. If it's a process, you need to map out how it is done. This is important because everybody likes greenfield changes, but we actually live in a brownfield world. Most of what we do is to change fix the engine of a car while we are still having to drive it. I can't shut down the economy while making the changes. So I need to know what this is, what it is that I'm changing. And very importantly, why this is important is because of something called the Pareto principle, the 80-20 rule. Why? Because once I have figured out what the as-is process is, one of the learnings of process reforms is that, in fact, you don't need to change very much. In order to get 80% of the effect, you actually need to make only 20% of the process different. This changes time, saves time, resources, but very importantly, this is the reason why most of the time you actually don't need structural reform. You just need to change something relatively small and it changes. In fact, I won't even call it a 80-20 rule. A lot of the time it's a 90-10 rule. 10% of the process, and I will illustrate all of this so you don't have to remember this, but 10% of the process does 90% of the difference. Then of course the next step is to actually do those changes. And the final step, which is unfortunately very often forgotten in government, which is having done the changes to monitor the new process to see if you actually managed to achieve the thing that you wanted to achieve. Now this in the government is somewhat different from doing it in a company or even a university or somewhat because of the problem of unintended consequences. You may have made a change, it may actually have even solved the problem you were trying to change, but it ended up causing a problem somewhere else in the system. Unfortunately, governments are very poor at doing this. There are many reasons for this, not the least that by the time the actual effects of the change happened, the original officers who had done the change have probably got transferred, or the government has changed, or this change or the impact of this, the unintended consequence, the butterfly effects happened somewhere so totally different from where you started that nobody actually notices that it happens till it becomes a big issue. So this monitoring of the new process and the effects are important. So now I've done with the boring parts, let's get on with the rest. So there is a lot of literature, as I said, on business process reengineering. Unfortunately, government process reengineering is not a part of academia. Almost, the odd case study you will find. But if IIT Kharagpur wants to start an economics and public administration course, please create one on systems thinking and process reform, because you will be unique in the world. There are all these great famous courses in the Kennedy School in Harvard and all that. None of them actually tell you how to do reforms. So if you created one, you would be unique. One of the things, however, we learned from process reform, which we're going to teach here, is that a common thing when you want to reform is to say, okay, let's take the process, let's digitize it, let's create a website. If you have not, on the other hand, changed the process and simply digitize it, it more often than not has no effect at all. In fact, sometimes it worsens the problem because at least the old non-digital process had all kinds of exceptions and exemptions had evolved over time and it was somehow functioning. Now you've digitized it. An inefficient system nicely digitized is actually even worse than not digitizing it, because now you can't have any exceptions and exemptions that you could earlier do in some fashion. And as I said, let me remind you again, the as-is mapping part is very, very important, because when you do this as-is mapping, this is when you discover where in the process the real blockage lies. Again, engineers will understand this. The thickness of a highway, the width of a highway is defined by its narrowest point, right? So finding the narrowest point is most of the game. Okay. This is again the Pareto principle that I mentioned. It's named after, by the way, somebody called Vilfredo Pareto. He was an Italian economist of the early 20th century. And he found something very interesting, that there is very common phenomena, a common ratio that you find in economics, which is the 80-20 rule. He started out by finding that 80% of Italy's land were owned by 20% of the population. Then later he found that 80% of the industrial production came from just 20% of the companies, and so on and so forth. So this 80-20 phenomena is very common in economics. And that idea was then used by Joseph Juran, who is a pioneer of quality management. He found that this 80-20 rule exists in all processes in the system, and therefore changing a very small part of that system makes the whole system function. And I'm going to come back to this again. Okay, so now that you've got the theory done, now let's come to the process reforms that I have been personally pursuing in the central government. Most of the examples I will give you are examples that I have personally pursued. But of course, there are many others in the government who are also doing this. There are people like Mr. Rajiv Gauba, who is now a member of Niti Aayog, but previously the cabinet secretary, who has also got a committee who is doing it. The current cabinet secretary is also doing it. So there's a huge effort in doing process reforms right now. I have discovered about 8 types of process reforms. If you find about 7 types of process reforms. If you find an 8th category, I'm happy to add it here. But roughly speaking, this is the kinds of process reforms you have. The first type is a very simple type of reform, which does not need you to go to parliament, does not even require you to do some major change of regulations or even administrative streamlining, which is to revisit all the default lists and precedents of your system. Any large system, including, I'm sure, IIT Kharagpur as well, will basically be based on certain default things it does. It's not written anywhere, there are no laws, but this is how things function. And in government, this is very much true. If you go and try and change anything in government, they'll say, no, sir, we can't do it because this is the precedent. So one of the simplest way of doing reforms is simply to go and look at precedents and lists in the system. So for example, when I was principal economic advisor in the finance ministry, one of my jobs was every year before the budget to organize the finance minister's interactions with different groups before the budget. You'll read about it in the newspapers. Finance minister interacts with economists, industry, labor unions, or whatever it is that they are. So it was one of my jobs, and I got lists of people who are typically invited to these. So I looked at the list, and then I discovered something very interesting, that the list was full of people who were no longer alive. Nobody had bothered to actually cancel out their names. And yet these names had carried on. New names were added along the way. But nobody would take the trouble of getting rid of these lists of people who simply could not attend in person, maybe in spirit, but not in person. But then I began to find this kind of thing across the system. So for example, let's take the list of national monuments. Okay? India has about 3,600 odd nationally protected monuments. So these are the monuments. When you go there, you'll see the small blue board next to it, threatening you with all dire consequences if you did anything to the monument. Those are the ones. Now, the Archaeological Survey of India is supposed to protect them under AMSAR Act, and we have 3,600 of them. So the question that arises is that how did we end up getting this list of 3,600? Why this 3,600 and not some other 3,600? So when I dug into this is what I found. I found that about 2/3 of them were basically inherited from the colonial government, the British colonial government. And most of the other 1/3 were from the princely states. A handful of monuments were added in independent India, but basically the list of nationally protected monuments that we have today is from the colonial period, both from the colonial government and from the princely states. So I began to dig into the things that are in the list. So the first thing I discovered was there are dozens of monuments that are missing. So they are national monuments of India which the Archaeological Survey cannot find. And it's not something I just discovered today. There are actually questions in Parliament that have been answered by the Archaeological Survey going back to the 1970s, where the Archaeological Survey has stated in writing that it does not know where that monument is. And there are dozens of them. Then there are large numbers of monuments that are actually graves of obscure colonial era officials. Now, not big officials. I'm not talking about maybe a memorial like Victoria Memorial. That's a large building. It's a beautiful building. I can understand that you may want to protect it. But let's say you go to Nagaland. Nagaland has 4 national monuments. Of them, 3 of them are graves of obscure officials, not even senior officials. They are PWD engineer type officials. Their graves are national monuments on which all the rules that apply to the Taj Mahal apply to it. It has a budget. There is a dedicated Archaeological Survey of India person who is supposed to look after it. And that monument is about 1/3 the size of this stage. I wrote a report about it with photographs so that you can go and look it up. But now let me tell you one of the most absurd ones that I found. So you are aware that in 1857-58 there was a great revolt in India. Now, at the end of that revolt, the British reconquered Delhi, what was then the walled city, Old Delhi. And the person, the East India Company general who did this, his name was a brigadier general called John Nicholson. And John Nicholson sacked Delhi, and he carried out a massive massacre, not just of the soldiers, but also of the civilian population. And by the standards of that time also, he was considered absolutely extreme. Anyway, he sacked the city, it became and the British won, and the revolt was suppressed. Now, naturally, John Nicholson was a hero to the British. So a few years later, they raised a huge statue of his in front of Kashmiri Gate, which is a very densely populated part of Delhi. They raised a big statue to him. So fair enough. Now, in 1947, we became independent. So now this statue of John Nicholson became a part of the national monuments of independent India. We, of course, did not revise this list, so it carried on till 1958, when John Nicholson's hometown in Northern Ireland wrote a letter to the then government saying that, look, I presume that you don't have any use for this statue anymore. Can we have it? So the government pulled down the statue, put it in bubble wrap, and sent it off to Northern Ireland, which is now standing in the middle of his hometown. And presumably every year on his birthday or something, they might be commemorating him, whatever it is the case. But the interesting part is that in India, we never delisted it from the list of national monuments. So the empty space on which the statue used to stand continued to be a national monument till I discovered it in 2022. So what happens is that all national monuments have this rule that 100 plus 200 meter radius of that monument is considered protected, and that if any changes that are made there you have to go to the Archaeological Survey of India for changes. Now, I understand doing this for the Brihadeshwara temple or some great monument, Taj Mahal or something like that. But this also applied to the non-statue at Kashmiri Gate. And so if you lived in Kashmiri Gate, and it's a very densely populated area, you actually had to go to the circle officer of Archaeological Survey of India, and this is even if you're making a change inside your house, you had to get his explicit permission. So you can imagine the harassment, the rent seeking, and all the rest that followed this. So when I discovered this, I decided that rather than try and convince anybody, I just wrote a newspaper article, I think it was in the Hindustan Times, and wrote about it. So a lot of people in Archaeological Survey of India got very annoyed with me. Thankfully, you will be pleased to hear that in December 2024, the non-statue of John Nicholson was finally delisted from the list of national monuments. But his grave, which is not far from Kashmiri Gate, is still a national monument, and I'm still working on it. But I'm just giving you a flavor of the kinds of things that exist across the government. In every institution, I'm 100% sure you dig into your own institute and you will discover hundreds of these that exist. Nobody knows why they exist, but they continue. So this is type 1. Type 2. This is basically administrative streamlining. Here, you don't need to change the law. You don't need to change the regulation, just administrative streamlining. I'll give you an example shortly. Third, here you have to change the rules and regulations. So you do have to issue new rules and regulations. Fourth, you actually have to go back to Parliament. This is somewhat more complicated because obviously you have to go back to Parliament, pass a law. You may have to amend it, sometimes a brand new law. So you have to change the legislative changes. Type 5, here you have to add some capacity. So as I told you, you have a chain of the process, but there's one place in that process where there's inadequate capacity, state capacity. You have to add some state capacity there. Type 6, you have to remove some state or state-enabled monopoly. So for example, some of you will be surprised to hear, the younger members of this audience, that till 2020, Google Maps was actually technically illegal in this country. So if you are using it, you are actually breaking the law. The reason is that all maps and anything to do with maps was actually a monopoly of an institution called the Survey of India, based in Dehradun. It's a very old institution, more than 200 years old. And it was once headed by somebody called George Everest, after whom Mount Everest is named. Very famous institution, but they had, for a variety of reasons, a monopoly on all things related to maps. So we had a peculiar situation where Google Maps and Google Map Maker, which was being widely used in India, and ironically, Google Map Maker is actually an Indian invention from Google's Hyderabad operations. Lalitesh was one of its inventors, and it was widely used. But in India itself, it was illegal, although everybody was using it. So it's only in 2020 that this monopoly had to be removed, and that's how Google Maps actually became legal in this country. So there are many such things, the drone sector, for example, it used to require till 2020 77 separate permissions in order to fly a drone in India. Of course, you went to any wedding, there were plenty of them flying around, and entirely technically illegally. So over several weekends, I and an official called Manhar Yadav, we actually sat down and we simplified it from 7 rules to just 7. And this now 5-6 years we have been functioning using those new rules, and as far as we can tell, nothing particularly bad has happened. So you didn't really need those 77 rules. So this is one kind of change. And finally, rationalizing the institutional architecture of government. In any large system, there will be bodies that appear, maybe that had some use in the originally, but time has passed and those bodies are no longer of any use. And yet those bodies will perpetuate themselves forever. So one important thing is to do an as-is mapping of government and to find these institutions and to either shut them down, close them, and so on and so forth. But this has to be done very carefully. Now, one way of doing it is the way Elon Musk tried to do it with Doge. But as you saw, that it causes, unless you do it carefully by mapping it out, the amount of friction you end up creating ends up that entire process breaks down. But we have been doing it now for many years, and I've been personally involved in shutting down dozens of obscure institutions. I'll give you one example. We used to have these bodies called All India Handloom Board, All India Handicraft Board, and so on. So some 4-5 years ago, as part of this mapping of government, I discovered that there were lots of bodies doing the similar kind of things. So both at state and central level, there are bodies, there is a silk board, there is, cottage industries, all kinds of bodies which are supposed to look after handicrafts and so on. So the question is not whether government wants to support those activities. The question is whether or not those bodies are doing anything useful. And if they're not doing it, we should shut them down. So I wrote a note and sent it up to the then Textile Minister, Smriti Irani ji, and she began to shut down some of these bodies. So the moment that the All India Handicraft Board was shut down, there was a lady who I will not name, who had been the chairman of that All India Handicraft Board for some 16 odd years. She wrote a very nasty social media post, basically saying this government is fascist, it does not believe in helping artisans, and it is shutting down this very venerable and important institution, All India Handicraft Board, and so on and so forth. And many people then wrote articles and so on. So as I said, the point is not whether artisans need to be helped. There are many bodies at both central and state government level which are doing it. Question is, was this body doing anything useful? So when this big post was written about, why the All India Handicraft Board needs to be perpetuated. Smriti Irani ji responded by basically saying, okay, we will reinstate it if you can provide us with any minutes of a meeting that you have held in the last decade. We are still waiting for it. So there are many such bodies that are continuously being closed. This is part of how we do it. Now I'm going to take you and show you some very details of a few processes that we have changed. Now, the first example and case study that I'm going to show you is something called voluntary liquidation of companies. Now, just like you set up companies in a country, thousands of companies are set up every year. Every year, you also shut down companies. This is an important part of ease of doing business. And only a very small number of them actually shut down because they are insolvent or bankrupt and so on. Most of them shut down because of voluntary reasons. For example, there is an old businessman who has been running a company, he is now old, his kids are not interested in running that business, so he wants to shut it down. Or a company was set up because there was some special purpose it was set up for, that special purpose vehicle is now served its purpose, so he shut down a company. Nobody is objecting to the shutting down. And yet, till a few years ago, it used to take years to shut down a company. Years. Now, keeping a company alive is not an easy thing. You have to hold its meetings, you have to follow all the laws of keeping a company running. So it is a real big pain. There's a lot of money spent, time spent to keep a company running. So there were literally these thousands of companies that were running, wanted to shut down, everybody agreed it should be shut down, and yet this was the situation. So when I began to look into this in end 2021, I discovered that there were at that time 28,536 pending cases of people who wanted to shut down their companies. Nobody was objecting to them shutting down, and yet 10% of them were pending for over 1,000 days, 54 were pending for more than 1 year. So this was the situation, really painful process. On average, the median company would take about 500 days to strike it off till the year 2020-21. So what is the first way to solve the problem? As is mapping. I told you many times, so now you know. So we did the as is mapping of this, and this is what we discovered. So the first step of shutting down a company is, of course, the company has to convene a board meeting where they have to basically say, okay, we want to shut down. They have to then file a STK2 form, which is fine, with the ROC, which is the Registrar of Companies. And the director has to furnish a declaration, everything, basically saying we want to shut down this company. A chartered accountant has to then state that, there's a resolution, an indemnity bond, all these things are done. Now, these things can be done quite quickly. This was not the problem. Then comes step 4. You basically, the registrar of companies had to then issue a public notice in a prescribed manner in the official website of the Ministry of Corporate Affairs and the official gazette and the largest circulating newspaper, it could be one in English and one in Indian language, giving a 30-day notice in case anybody had any objection or claim to this being shut down. So you have to notify the public we're shutting them down in case somebody had something owed by this company, which is all fair. The problem was that this step in the process, just putting out the advertisement in the newspaper, could take years. In fact, we kind of pretended that we wanted to shut down a company, and I sent somebody in my office to try and see what they do. They went to the office of the Registrar of Companies, and they discovered that there was a whole ecosystem of brokers who would effectively contribute their help, in quotes, to shut it down. And there was actually a rate card, depending on the size of your company, of how much effectively you had to pay them in order for them to help you to shut down your company. And effectively, the place they helped you was to basically put out this advertisement through the Registrar of Companies. So this is basically what used to go on. In addition, you needed to get a whole bunch of NOCs. This is no objection certificates from various departments like tax and so on. That also sometimes used to take some time. So we mapped this out. So as I told you, the biggest amount of delay used to happen in this strike-off advertisement in the newspaper. There was no strict timeline for doing this, and multiple demands of random, and so way you would delay it, and the ROC would keep making random demands of documents and say, bring us this, bring us that, this form is not the correct format, even though they were the people who gave that form. So all this used to go on. So we mapped all of this, and we actually presented it to Nirmala ji, who is also, by the way, the Minister of Corporate Affairs. And so then we began to work on trying to solve it. So how did we solve this? So we basically created a new online system called the Central Processing for Accelerated Corporate Exit, CPACE portal. In this portal, basically what now we have to do, we had a transparent set of things, one set of things that the company had to put in once. Once it had put on all its details into the system and the system had accepted it, the system then itself sends out emails to people who are supposed to give no objection certificates. And the system is set up that after 30 days, if nobody objects, then the system itself generates a list of companies that are to be advertised in the newspapers for the ROC. The registrar of companies is allowed to object to them, but it has to do it in writing and tell us why is it that it is objecting to a particular company being put up for closure. Now, of course, the ROC never comes back on this. So essentially, for 99.99% of the cases, it defaults to an advertisement, and these advertisements are now happening in a routinized basis. As a result of this, see what happens to the process. This is what has happened. What used to take on average almost 500 days now takes only 60 days. This is an 88% reduction in time. In fact, it is now faster than the fastest in the world, which is Singapore. This is now the fastest for shutting down a company. We can't make it any faster because obviously we need to create some slack in the system for objections and so on. This has been done in India with almost no cost, doing very, very little. This is in fact an example of a 90-10 rule. Just 10% of the process had to be changed. In fact, it was the most irrelevant part of the system that had to be changed. It was routinized, and now you see what is happening. Just like this, there are other ways. So that way of shutting down the company is the company law route of shutting down a company. Most companies in India use it, like 99% of companies use that rule. However, there is another way of shutting down companies in India using the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code. This is mostly meant for very large companies. So even if very large companies are not going bankrupt, but they want to shut down voluntarily, they can use this system. This system too used to have the similar kinds of problems. Here, we again listed the thing. As I said, when I looked into this in December 21, I discovered that final reports had only been received for 49% of the cases, and only 25% of the cases actually been dissolved. So 75% of the cases under this route were just lying around. And money was being spent hiring lawyers and trying to get it, and nothing would move. So again, we looked into it, as is mapping. What did we discover through all of this? That most of the delay effectively happened in this step 5, which was the no objection certificate. So if you wanted to shut down a company, you had to get no objection certificate from all kinds of people: the Central Board of Direct Taxes, Central Board of Indirect Taxes, Customs, Employee Provident Fund, and all kinds of sectoral regulators. The irony was that the IBC route, nowhere in the law was it written that you had to get this NOC. Nowhere. And yet, the system was set up that you had to get it. But because it wasn't there in the law, there was no actual format in which to get it. So everybody wrote their own way. The NCLT courts differently asked it in different ways. And all of this went on delay on delay on delay on delay. Again, as I said, the key issue was delayed, but the delays in NOCs was the main issue. And there was no standard operating principle. Everybody was creating their own process for doing this. We solved this by doing the following. First of all, In November 21, we got IBBI, that's the Indian Bureau of Insolvency and Bankruptcy Bureau of India. They issued a circular basically clearly stating that no NOC is needed from the income tax department, which is basically where all the delays used to happen. And then we basically created a compliance certificate, which is basically a checklist like this. Clearly stated what is the paperwork you needed to do, Form H. And we said if somebody has filled this form out, then that is it. That means you have complied with everything. Nobody can ask you to fill any other form or any other thing. And look at again what happens as a result. These are the percentage of cases of voluntary liquidation under IBC. It has gone from 44 to 78% where the final report is available, and from just 23% of the cases which were being earlier had been resolved, something like 59% of the cases have now been resolved, and the number is continuously rising. This is a big relief for ease of doing business to the corporate sector. Now I'm going to give you a completely different example from a totally different area called the Investor Education and Protection Fund. How many of you even know what on earth the IEPF is? Any of you know what this is? There is one gentleman there, one gentleman there. There are sort of 2-3 people here who know what it is. Well, this is basically the place where unclaimed shares go to die. So supposing one of your grandaunts has left you 100 crores worth of shares and you're feeling very happy because now you've got 100 crores worth of shares that you've inherited, then let me tell you, you shouldn't be so excited, because these shares will first end up in this investor education fund, which it's unclear how it either educates or protects funds. Because effectively what will happen that the higher likelihood that you will meet your grandaunt in the afterlife before you will actually get the shares. So about a year and a half ago, I discovered it, and I found that as of March 2025, there were about 51,000 applications that were listed under this, with almost, there was something like 80,000 crores worth of shares and dividends of over 10,000 crores. So almost 1 lakh crores worth of money was stuck inside this, and more was coming in. And on average, we found that it used to take 3 years for getting your shares back. But in fact, this is of those who persisted for 3 years. Most people actually gave up. And even of the 3 people who did 3 years, after 3 years people got it, most of them had got it because they paid off some broker along the way who charged them up to 20% of the value of their shares. So from your grandaunt's 100 crores, 20 crores you had to give to this broker. So again, same thing as this process. So what did we discover? First of all, we discovered that there were 25 steps in doing this. And if on the 24th step something went wrong, you had to go back to step 1. This discovery, of course, should not be surprising because snakes and ladders is an Indian sport. Yeah, it's invented in India, really. Not only that, this 25 steps was spread over 3 separate portals. So you had to do a whole bunch of steps for getting the approval on one portal, download everything onto paper, enter it manually into the second one in order to get the shares transferred to you. Then take out all of that and enter it again into a third portal in order to get your dividends back. So 25 steps, 3 separate portals where you have to manually enter it. This is the reason I'm telling you, do not simply digitize the whole thing. At least in the old days, there was one file and then went up the system. Here you have to download, upload, download, and you can imagine every time there's small error, go back to step 1. Now I'm proposing that IIT Kharagpur proposes the person who invented this process for the next Nobel Prize. So now do you want me to take you through every single one of these 25 steps? Really want to do? No? Okay. So here, just so that you say, these are first 7 steps. Here is the next 13 steps. One by one, these are the steps. And some poor soul in my team actually went and figured it out. Then transfer of shares, step 14 to 17, and then step 18 to 25 to get your dividends that are stuck in the system. This is what we had to do. So, what did we discover? Obviously, the biggest problem was these 3 separate portals. Simple thing to solve. All you have to do is use APIs to allow this to do. And then there were lots of redundant steps or steps that you could do in parallel. So, we began to solve this. And so, we began to solve these things. So, first of all, we just created one step. You enter it, that same thing does. If any error is there, it just goes back one step. That alone removed this, got it down. This combined with a few parallel things, we managed to reduce the number of steps from 25 to 15 in one shot. Having done that, we now are improving this further, but already by the time we got the unified steps and running, the system began to run in last October. See what happened. So, we were doing about 900 approvals, roughly speaking, till last August, September, when the old system was running. We introduced the new system in end September, October, and immediately we went from 900 to 3,614 cases in the very first month. Next month, we managed to do 7,500. After that, 11,000, and the latest month, March, that I have data for, we did 14,500 approvals. So, the same system, same rules, same laws. I have not changed the laws or anything. Same officials. Just improving the system means I went from 900 to 14,500 approvals per month. So much so, I am now, here in August, I have basically now cleared up the entire almost cleared up. I think by this October, we'll have cleared up the entire backlog. You remember we had 58,000 cases backlog. I have now almost cleared it. And so, by certainly the last quarter of this calendar year, we will be basically real time. It will just take a few weeks to clear the system and carry on. Same data I'm just giving you, that was in terms of number of approvals, and now I'm giving you in terms of number of shares transferred. You can see what has gone up since October, March, the number of cases that we are doing. It's a multiple of what we were doing per year we have done in 6 months. So this is the kind of process reforms that we are now doing. And I'm literally doing hundreds of this through the system. And there are others in the government. I mentioned Rajiv Gaubaji and our current Cabinet Secretary, Somnathanji. We are doing literally hundreds of this. Not all of them have worked, but some of them. So one of the processes where a lot of effort is going into, but it's complex to do, is EPFO. But many others as well. So, here is, I hope now you have understood what on earth we are trying to do through process reforms. But as a part of this, I have discovered many things about policy making and rule making and law making in government. And one of these is what I call the 99-1 problem. The 99-1 problem happens because the world we live in is a complex system. It is a non-deterministic complex system, which many of you here in the audience work on complexity and chaos theory. You'll know what I'm talking about. For those who don't, basically the world is a place where a large number of separate agents are interacting in unpredictable ways. And at any point, it can go down various pathways. So at any point, the world can go down into essentially infinite number of future states. Now, this creates the following problem, which a Nobel Prize winning economist called Oliver Hart basically put it as the incomplete contracts theorem, which is that no matter how well you are as a lawyer, all contracts are effectively incomplete. There will always be some future state of the world where your whatever the contract it is you wrote will end up with basically an unhappy suboptimal outcome. So of course, a law is of course a contract. It's a contract between the citizen and the state. So this is also true of laws. There is no way of writing a perfect law. Every law, if the law hangs around long enough, there will be some future state of the world where that law will lead to a suboptimal outcome. So the problem is that lawmakers and policymakers try to create these laws which will be applicable to every possible future outcome. But it is not possible. So what happens is, effectively, every time some new exception, exemption, etc. turns up, they tweak the law in order to deal with the new situation, which is fine. Adaptive change is good. I am a big votary of agile. But you have to be a little careful with this. Because if you keep doing this over long periods of time, you will end up with a situation where 99% of the laws apply for the 1% of the cases where there are exceptions, misuse, criminal something, negligence or something. And all the 99% of the people who are doing compliant people of the normal cases will have to jump through many, many hoops in order to comply with rules that have absolutely no application to them. And of course, policymakers will make ever more complicated rules in order to deal with this. And every time they will say, see, we now have the gold standard. But a gold standard, by and large, is a very complicated law which makes most of the normal compliant cases essentially unnecessarily complicated. So the 99.1 rule, or if you prefer it, depends certain circumstances you want 99.9.1 rule, whatever you want to call it, basically that I am stating is that the most efficient law is actually one that is simple and applies for the bulk of the cases, and that the exceptions where the law breaks down for whatever reason should actually not be dealt with the law itself, but by the court system or by an ombudsman or some such other pathway. And that's why you need them. And that is one of the reasons, by the way, I am a big votary that having a good quick legal system is such an important thing. Because if you have a quick, simple process for the legal system, all the laws can actually be simplified. So this is one of the important things that I want to bring. The other thing is, of course, which I pointed out, that blanket application of digital technology is not a substitute for process reform. I showed you earlier, if you just digitize a bad process, you actually make it even worse. Third, which I told you, the gold standard is not the mindless application of something called best practice. In governments, everybody says, best practice, and then they will go for a foreign tour somewhere, come back with some best practice and mindlessly apply it in a situation where it does not need it. And this brings me to a process reform that has not yet been done, but which I am now currently advocating, which is the Transparency of Rules Act. The logic of this is that one of the major sources of inefficiency in the economy, but generally in life in India, is that actually nobody knows what is it, the rules, regulations, etc., that we are supposed to comply with. Average citizen in this country will not know even something as basic as the traffic laws. I can tell you, take out your phone and tell me what is the actual fine by Kolkata police for Kolkata's traffic police for breaking the traffic by driving through a traffic light or driving in the wrong lane or any other thing. I'll be very, very surprised if you can tell me exactly what the fine is. It is 500, so okay, here you know it. In many cities in this country, nobody knows. What is the process? Are they supposed to take your license from you or not? They are not. Okay, at least in Kolkata, there seems to be clarity on this. Most cities in this country actually do not know. And I actually wrote about this in Delhi about 2 years ago. And then after that, the Delhi police actually put all these things up on their website. But for many, many things, you will not know what your rules are. You know, just by me standing here and probably giving a lecture, I'm 100% sure I'm breaking some law. And yet, the basis of our legal system is that the ignorance of the law is not a defense. Right? But if ignorance of the law is not a defense, then at least I should have a fighting chance as a citizen to know what the law is. It is impossible to know this in this country. So I am pushing for something called the Transparency of Rules Act, which will do the following. It will lay out the following things. First, at least for central government laws, and states can do it on their own as well, but since I am the central government, that every ministry and department has to put up in a central repository all the rules and regulations that a citizen is supposed to follow. If a rule and regulation is not put up in that central depository, then the citizen of the country should not be required to follow them at all. Right? It's a fair deal. Next, the Transparency of Rules Act will say that when this rule is put up, there will be a time stamp. So the time stamp will state that at 9 o'clock in the morning, on the 4th of August, this was the law. So if at 10 o'clock the law was changed, then the official cannot tell me that 9 o'clock you should have followed this law. Cannot do it retrospectively. Yeah? This is also a fair thing. It has to be done because otherwise officials will retrospectively apply all kinds of things to you. 2. And the third is that all the rules, regulations, etc. will be told to me as it exists today and not as a series of circulars. Right? Again, not rocket science, simple thing to do. You can imagine how popular I'll be after this with the bureaucracy and the lawyers. Now, we actually have done an experiment in this with the Reserve Bank. The Reserve Bank, all of you know what the Reserve Bank is, it's our central bank, used to have more than 9,000 circulars accumulated by 2025, some of them dating back to 1944. And nobody really knew which one is what applied where because none of these circulars were actually being withdrawn. Some of them had been, but many of them was alive and many of them contradicted each other. So you can imagine the kind of confusion there used to be. So in November 28, 2025, the RBI announced that it had basically issued 244 master circulars or master directions. And what it did is that there used to be, as I said, 9,446 circulars, of which, as a result of this, 3,809 were actually subsumed into the master circular. So we now knew which one was the live ones. Note here, I'm not making any law changes. All I'm doing is taking the law as is and putting them into the master circular of the ones that are still apply. So now these 3,809 were put into these 244 master circulars grouped by subject area. And this allowed us to get rid of 5,673 circulars that no longer applied. Okay? So now we know which laws apply and they are there by subject. And now, since then till now, these are the master circulars that apply. When changes happen, the circular itself is changed. The result of this is a dramatic simplification of the amount of difficulty of compliance that our banking system, non-banking system, etc. have done. The number of all kinds of conflicts there is to be, the banks are clear what is it they're supposed to do, the customers are clear, the non-banks are clear, the foreign exchange people are clear. So that has dramatically simplified the way in which our financial system functions. So, to conclude, while big structural reforms are indeed needed from time to time, hopefully through this presentation I've shown to you that process reforms are a very powerful tool that policymakers can use in order to make our system much, much more efficient. This is true for ease of doing business. It is true for ease of living and any other area that you want to apply this for. So this is a very important policy tool. Sadly, this is not taught in any public administration course anywhere in the world, by the way. When I took this to OECD, they were also stunned. we need to move up from the random occasional case studies to systematic study of how to do reforms. And there are many other aspects which I have not brought about transition management and other things which can also become a part of this. I didn't get into that. But we need to bring this up as an area of subject of study. And since IIT Kharagpur mentioned that they wanted to develop this particular course, well, here you are. Here is a big area of work with very little research anywhere in the world. Incidentally, this is also a subject that I am trying now to introduce into the Indian Public Administration Training Institutes, which we have across the country. We also have something called Mission Karma Yogi, where every civil servant of the central government is supposed to go through certain hours of training. I have introduced this very presentation with some modifications, of course, into something called IGOT, which is every civil servant in this country will have to go through process reform training. And so as a result of this, the idea is to get every level of government to begin to make these small changes. And what is important that I obviously talked about sort of relatively big picture changes. Actually, you can do it at every level of government. Even the most junior most person can make small process changes. For example, the queuing systems in a government office. When you go to a government office, there's complete chaos. Nobody knows who's, and of course, it's been done in order to facilitate certain communities of brokers. But there are people who want to change that, and it can be changed. And so there are thousands of such small changes that we can make, and when we begin to do this, the system begins to become somewhat more efficient at every level. And in this way, hopefully, over the next decade or so, we will be able to move closer to our dream of Viksit Bharat. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I'm happy, if you can put on the lights, I'm happy to do some Q&A. Yeah, that's more. Traffic rules are, of course, state government stuff, but if you tell me central government stuff, I'm happy to look at it myself. Yeah. So somebody can please get a mic, and if you can introduce yourself, and if you can have a specific question about something, I'll take a bunch of questions together in the interest of time. Yeah.
The problem is we are in mobility, right? We call it.
We meaning who?
Everybody.
Okay.
From plus, and because logistic issue comes in.
Okay. So if you have a specific question, sir.
The question is the rules are made to file you, not to make me easy to move.
No. So we need to, if you have a better set of rules and regulations, please write them out. And we can lobby with the state government because most of the traffic rules are actually state run. But if they are national level, they are also national level framework rules. We can have a look at them. So if you can tell us exactly what the rules are.
Definitely will give you feedback.
Yeah, okay. We can have a look at that. Thank you. If you can pass the mic on to someone else, please, sir.
Thank you.
There's a lady here and then we'll bring it there.
Thank you for
Yeah,
the wonderful
thank you.
presentation. Thank you for Torah. My question is regarding the economic fugitives. Like, have you thought about bringing them back? They would set an example for all the law-abiding citizens, like Nirav Modi.
Yes. So I can't comment on specific people, but as you know, the government has been prosecuting many of these people in these tax havens where they have been there. Many of them obviously fled more than a decade ago. And it's very sad, but jurisdictions in certain places like the UK actively discourage you from deporting them to India. In fact, in some cases they make, not in these specific cases, I don't know, but there are many cases, not just economic fugitives, but actual fugitives. You will remember there was a case of dropping of arms some 20 years ago. Purulia. And the people who were involved in it, and remember this is a terrorist case, were Danish, and we have still not been able to extradite them. So there are countries which will not extradite very easily. These are difficult things to do, and one of the common excuses made by European countries is that the conditions of the jails in this country is not good enough. Now I have always been that we should then, there are plenty of jails that were built by the Europeans when they were colonizing here. So there's those jails which must be to European standards, I'm sure. You know, even Kala Pani can be deployed as a European-built jail. But yes, I mean, but one good thing has happened is that I think the number of fugitives incrementally that have gone out have dramatically come down, as you may know. So most of these cases are still legacy cases, but yes, the Indian government is certainly intends to bring back all these people, yes. Meanwhile, of course, many of their assets have been taken over and sold, so that has been done. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. First of all, my
Okay,
regards to
so why don't we take this? I think there's a fireside chat. So I'm sorry, I'm getting in the way of somebody. So why don't we take this on to a fireside chat? Yeah, you can continue. Just a sec. Yeah.
Thank you, Shri Sanjeev Sanyal, sir, for such a brilliant and thought-provoking perspective. You have set a phenomenal context on the complexities, policy mechanics, and the behind-the-scene execution of economic reforms in India. And moving to the other most anticipated and exciting segment of today's program, we'll now begin the fireside chat featuring an engaging interactive session between Shri Sanjeev Sanyal and our director, Professor Shubhan Chakraborty.
Yeah.
May I invite our director to come to the stage and initiate the dialogue. So this session brings together two distinct perspectives: high-level national economic policy execution and academic leadership from one of India's premier technical institute. Director,
So we
sir,
can ask your question in the course of the thing. Okay. Sit down for now. Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Hello, hello.
Yeah, we'll come to you. We'll come to you.
So we just continue. It is nothing which is discontinuous, and we would begin with thanking Shri Sanyal for the great talk. And what is defined as a part of this event is fireside chat. I know that fire is burning in everyone's stomach, so we'll see that how much we can progress. But there are many things which we cannot ask within the framework of a structured speech, and this is something that we are going to talk about. Many things which are connecting the national development and also aspirations of IIT Kharagpur as a institution. Now, so as I was listening to your talk, one thing that repeatedly came to my mind: throughout the history we have seen very defining moments that made every nation to possibly fundamentally redefine or reinvent themselves. Japan experienced, Korea, China. Do you think that it is the moment for India where it is not just another decade of growth? We have been having the past decade as definitely a decade of growth, but the beginning of a completely different trajectory. And what is your view on this?
So it depends what you mean. You see, when you talk about the big growth of Korea, Japan, and more recently China, do remember this whole game is about compounding. The most powerful thing in the world is compound interest rates. So China, for example, China and India were actually at the same level of size of economy and per capita income circa 1990. China then became the fastest growing major economy in the world in the subsequent 35 odd years. It all happened because of compounding. India, incidentally, is the second fastest growing major economy in the world. So it didn't actually do too badly. But because there are only a few percentage points different, that percentage point has compounded over 35 round cycles. So that's why we have ended up with them becoming a lot bigger. First of all, we haven't done too badly. We both started at a very low level. It's just that China has done so well, we don't look so well. But we have actually done rather well for the last 35 odd years, just not at the China level. So in order, if we want to catch up with China, you know the arithmetic now, we just have to grow for the next 35 years the same percentage points faster than China than they grew over the last 35 years. Right? Arithmetic would cause convergence. Now you'll be pleased to hear that we are now growing about 2.5 percentage points faster than China in the last few years. We have already started doing this. So our game is to simply compound it over the next 25, 30 years. We will get there. But here is the tricky part. At every point in time, the environment in which you do this will pose all manner of challenges. So it's not like China grew sustained basis in double digits or something. There was actually a relatively small patch from around 2000 to 2008 or something where it grew at double digits. The rest of the time, it was actually growing about 8% or somewhere in that range. We are also growing in the 7-something% range. In the last quarter data, we had 7.8, so not too bad. But the real hype growth that they had happened during a phase when you got this Goldilocks period between 2000 and the 2008 crisis. They got 7-8 years of very high growth rates. We also, by the way, in that period grew quite well, but not as fast. So unfortunately, the last few years have been particularly difficult periods to do that rapid acceleration. We had the COVID crisis. We then had the Ukraine-related oil price spike. We now have the Iran war oil price spike. We had the current breakdown of the global trade architecture. So this is a very difficult time to simply begin accelerating. And people who think that we should just begin growing 8%, we will not be able to do it on a sustained basis if we do not look at the other part of it, which is economic stability. So macroeconomic stability is a very important part of the story. Growing fast is good, but you can only do this if you do it year after year after year of compounding. And for every China or Korea that has succeeded, there are large numbers of other countries that grew for a period of time and then didn't. So for example, in the 90s, when I was at university, the countries of that time that were supposed to be the great countries of the future were Thailand and Malaysia and Indonesia and Philippines. But those countries, after a few years of rapid growth, had a big crisis and never really quite came back. So very important, in addition to thinking about growth, is to think about compounding, which in turn means that we have to ensure that we do this while maintaining macroeconomic stability. Otherwise, you will get a few years of high growth and then you will have a crisis. And indeed, the first few years as a policymaker that I actually spent cleaning up the banking system. So we had actually attempted for a few years in the period 2009 to 13 to force growth through expanding the financial system, and then we misallocated capital and we became the fragile five, and we ended up with a banking system that nearly blew up. And it took us many, many years of cleaning up to begin to get it where it is today. So yes, high growth, but never forget, maintain control over inflation, maintain control over financial sector stability, make sure that fiscal debt does not go spiraling out, and external debt is reasonably maintained, and you do not use up your foreign exchange reserves for something unwise. So all of these are also parts of the system that you need to so it's a long answer to your short question.
No, absolutely.
But it is important that people remember that macroeconomic stability is a key ingredient of maintaining high growth if you want this compounding process to happen. So do not pursue maximalist growth at any point in time. It's about running the marathon, it's not about the sprint.
Absolutely. I think this is a bit of a philosophical, you can say that, people from technology also. Things are accelerating very fast in terms of the rapid change in the contents that we teach, the way in which research is being done, the way in which industry is shaping. And it is almost like, if you see when the mindset that we are talking about, that hardly people talk about stability. Even in like we are more into T20, T10, it will be T5 cricket, and everyone has forgotten, what a test match batting is, and you are talking about more or less, that classical approach still works. Now, as technology is accelerating, are institutions keeping pace to that? I am of course talking more from IIT Kharagpur perspective, but you see many different institutions. So we are all excited with AI, and AI is influencing everything that, what we do. So the question that precisely I want to put forward to you, that should our nation be preparing primarily for an AI revolution or be preparing for a human capital revolution?
Actually, they are the same things. And by the way, everybody talks about AI. There are a multitude of other technologies that are also coming. And there are many other things that are happening. The social change is happening. Many other things are happening simultaneously along with it. So what you have here is that globally, this is not an India problem, by the way. Globally, the job market is being massively disrupted. The old way in which the system worked is that you loaded up your human capital early in your life. You went to school, you went to university, whatever. Unless you were doing a PhD when you went to the late 80s, but by and large in the early 20s you were, by the time you're 22, 23, you're finished with your higher education, you go into the workforce, and basically that's what you do till you retire at 60 or whatever it is. A few people go in PhD, a small percentage, maybe they'll do it till their late 20s. But even then, basically, they will be running off that till you retire. That way of producing education and skills is, I'm afraid, dead. There are several reasons for this. First of all, technology itself is changing. So if you went by the old system, what is effectively now happening is the person who is the most outdated is the senior most in the system and making all the big decisions.
True.
Number one. Second, you also have a situation where most of us in this room will live into our 80s, well into our 80s. Some people in Japan will live into their 90s, which basically means that no pension system in the world is going to deal with this. So most of us will effectively also be working also well into our 70s. So not only is this change, it also means that we will be doing this away from our training human capital accretion system and working over long periods of time. So you will be, 50 years away from your original human capital phase, accumulation phase. But this also provides all manner of opportunity. The opportunity is also coming with the same technology that is disrupting. First, we can now create all manner of new ways of learning. For example, the old lecture-based way of accumulating knowledge is dead as well. AI can both give you the lecture, answer your questions a lot better than human beings can do it. And if you want a human being to do it, you don't have to listen to necessarily to the person who's teaching you in your classroom. You can go to YouTube and look at whoever is the world's best guy to do it. Why do you need your professor to do it? So in this environment, we are wasting too much time on lecture-based teaching. We now need to change all our teaching systems to systems which are much more about getting your hands dirty. So all institutions of every kind. Now we have actually developed over time in other fields systems of doing apprenticeships for teaching. For example, if you wanted to be a chartered accountant, who is a very high skill activity, being a chartered accountant, no easy task. And yet almost their entire teaching is actually done in an apprenticeship based thing, shoot articleships and so on. And most of their teaching is already online, has been for quite some time. So this think that we will move into hybrid situations where your lecturing will probably be already given to you, you do it on your own. You come to class, when you do, you're basically doing it to get your hands dirty. And in fact, most areas and most fields, I'm not saying this will happen maybe in surgery, but in many, many fields, you will basically expect people to start working at 18, do apprenticeship systems, and be studying along with it. Getting grease on your hand is a very important part of this world, because theoretical knowledge is anyway available on tap. What is your ability to apply it and combine different fields is the game. So if this is the environment we are going into, then the way university systems work have to, tertiary education of all kinds have to become change. They have to become a lot more like skilling and vocationalization of the education. And very importantly, all of us will have to expect to go back to doing training of some sort many times along the way. So if there are engineers here who actually wanted to be lawyers, this is your opportunity. Even if you're 50 years old, you can still go back to law fac, get your law degree, and you'll come back. Even if you come back at 55, you'll still have maybe 20, 25 years of a lawyer's career.
And with the experience of our technologists.
And the experience of a technologist. So, you know, whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, I know. Now, so the way in which you have presented it, and it's quite logical, that things are being shaped up by technology, and the ones who are influenced the most are the humans, and you know that relationship will remain. Now, this is true for any country in the world. What is so much unique in an India-specific perspective? For example, let us say, you know, AI we take as an example, but it could be any other technology. So, do you think that these would be the greatest equalizers? For example, you know, the rich and the poor, the rural and the urban, with some kind of safeguard that we need so that it doesn't also become the greatest divider. How do we do this?
So first of all, it is an equalizer in the sense that AI will make knowledge, theoretical knowledge, available on tap to everybody if you know what questions to ask. And with more AI technology in even translations, this will be also available in any language you want. And you can learn this at your own pace, anywhere and everywhere. In fact, universities around the world already, MIT, Arizona State, even our own IIT Madras is actually providing all its courses online. Some of it for free. Maybe you are also beginning to do it. So as I said, knowledge is available on tap. So in that sense, it is now massively equalizing. The place where it becomes unequal is that where is it that we create opportunities to take that knowledge and dirty our hands? So this is very important that institutions like yourself put in an extra effort to go out there and partner with industry, government, whatever the other areas are. And to do it not only with the big guys. It's one thing to create, you know, a center of excellence named after some very big industry or government, but to also partner with smaller institutions, local institutions, and create an ecosystem of cross-fertilization. Because in this environment, it is the multidisciplinary applications and mix and match that each individual's imagination can do that will have, you know, compounding, spiraling up benefits. Now, if we create ecosystems which people from different backgrounds can tap into, benefits everyone. But if we create walls, then, you know, it is not a good thing. And for this, there are many ways to do this. But one simple way is in the way in which we actually do urban planning of our universities. One of the things that has struck me, since I both went to university in India in Shri Ram College, and then I went to study later on in Oxford University, and then I've been to many universities around the world. One of the things that strikes me is that every academic institution in this country has a nice high wall around it. You go anywhere in the world, you go to MIT, Harvard, Oxford, they are scattered inside a city.
Do you think this wall is very symbolic? I mean, creates
It is
a
symbolic.
divide between.
Absolutely. It is symbolic of the way we think about knowledge and knowledge transfer and the transmission of knowledge. These walls, unfortunately, are walls that also keep people out in a real sense. So, for example, New York, NYU. Go to NYU, it's actually a whole bunch of buildings in southern Manhattan. But when you ask anyone to build a university in India, they first ask you for 3,000 acres of land. Why? Why do you need these 3,000 acres of land? In fact, even in India, some of our biggest, best institutions are scattered across the city, even today. Why do you need 3,000 acres of land or some ridiculous number, 800 acres of land to build IIT Jodhpur outside in the middle of nowhere? By the way, when IIT Jodhpur was being built, I had actually raised this issue, and the then founding director of IIT Jodhpur got very annoyed with me. And I explained this exact logic to him.
No, it actually reflects a mindset of over centralization and not really allowing things to cross connect.
Yes, so in fact, the one institution in the country which is beginning to break this down, I was recently at IIT Madras, and I was very pleased to see they have created a center of excellence. There are 530 odd startups which have come in, and not all of them have anything to do with IIT. But they have created a space for all these people to function inside the campus. They also do all kinds of events where the rest of the city of Chennai interacts with IIT. And they have nothing. It may be a music festival. It may be all kinds of other things.
You will be happy to know that our board has approved something known as Outreach Course Network.
Yeah.
By this, IIT Kharagpur is actually everywhere. I mean, through a network which
Yes,
connects
so this institute,
every aspirant who could not physically enter into the so-called, walls and the boundaries that you are talking about.
No, so for example, this institution is a good one. You're in the city, please build it out, your land, please expand out new buildings. Try to create it a place for all manner of the city. It should be a facility for all the citizens of the city of Kolkata to be able to come and participate in it. There may be people who have been to other institutions. Let them come and set up startups here. Let there be cross-disciplinary feedback loops through other institutions which are not into technology but may be doing something else. And since you are from Kharagpur, why don't you take charge of the city of Kharagpur? You have an architecture school, you have, I think, some town planning, talk to railways. Basically, you should be basically the sort of anchor institution of the city of Kharagpur.
We have a school of infrastructure actually.
Yes, let Kharagpur IIT become the owner, so to speak, of the city of Kharagpur.
That's great, really. Now, we were discussing about the cross-connect between various aspects, which will build institution forward. One, of course, we talked about AI, but, deep tech is one of those, and manufacturing. Being someone from mechanical engineering background, I keep on emphasizing the importance of manufacturing. And over a period of time, we all have heard that any economic progress is very deeply linked with the progresses in manufacturing and indigenous manufacturing. Now that semiconductors, energy, pharmaceuticals, many different aspects of, you can say, overall scientific and economic growth, they have come into the kind of prominence which maybe 30 years back was not so. Do you think the role of manufacturing is still the same, or in a different way?
Manufacturing will always play an important part of the Indian economy. Let me make it absolutely clear. We had to, of course, overcome a whole bunch of things. One of them was physical infrastructure, and you may have seen in the last decade we have worked very hard. India now has a lot better physical infrastructure in many parts of the country. It's world class, but even where it is not, we are building towards it and improving the highways, ports, and so on in many ways. A very important part of building manufacturing is that the physical infrastructure is better. But now we are trying to put resources into various sectors. Now, obviously, it needn't be all the sectors that were important in the past. We have to bring in, we have to create data centers maybe, or many other things that are needed for manufacturing of today. And so, yes, we will put in an effort. But while we can talk about policies, we can talk about physical infrastructure, process reforms, some of which I showed you, the single biggest problem, by the way, was a problem of mindset.
Absolutely. This is.
We were told repeatedly when I began to advocate for pushing manufacturing India, I was told repeatedly by the established economists that this is a bad idea, that India had missed its manufacturing moment and that we should go and only focus on services. Even somebody of the stature of Raghuram Rajan has repeatedly said that we should not even care about industrialization. But I have openly disagreed with this, and in order to do that, I had to obviously overcome a lot of the status quo thinking that was there, not just in policy, but in wider population, whose view was that it is a waste of time trying to industrialize. I'm sorry, I disagree. It's not that we will succeed in every single area of manufacturing, but once we begin to create certain clusters, we will succeed. In the last 5 years, we have emerged as a very significant player and the world's second largest player in the area of smartphones. Nobody would, 5 years ago, none of you would have believed it if I told you we were going to be a serious player in the smartphones segment. But we already are. I am telling you there will be other segments. Here is one segment that I am personally working on, shipbuilding. Okay? Why do we need to build shipbuilding? Well, quite apart from the industrial part of it, it is our single biggest geostrategic vulnerability. 95% of all our goods trade is goes by sea. Almost all of it, 90 of that 95% is on foreign-owned hulls. Okay? So we don't need sanctions from large countries. 3 or 4 major global shipping lines decide they don't like us, and we will be in serious trouble. From an economic perspective, we are actually an island. We don't trade with China. In the areas where we have the land borders, we trade with them through sea. And of course, we don't trade with Pakistan at all. So our major borders are not trade borders at all. Our entire trading capacity is through the sea. And yet, as I told you, 90 to 95% of all our sea trade is carried by foreign lines. So in the last 2-3 years, you may have, those of you who follow this area will know that I have been pushing this issue, and you'll be pleased to hear that just in the last 2 years, we have changed all the laws relating to shipbuilding, ship ownership, ship flagging, all these kinds. We have given ships infrastructure status. All of these have been changed in the last 2 years.
And this is so heartening for us because IIT Kharagpur is one such IIT which has ocean engineering and naval architecture as a department.
So, just to give you some flavor of how these things work, when I said that, let's change the flagging rules, people stared at me as some really obscure law that I had come up with. But you see how important this is. Now, after the Iran war and all the problems we have had in Hormuz, the flag you carry suddenly matters. And so, I was talking about this 2-3 years ago, people thought I was literally mad. So many, many changes are happening. You'll be glad to hear that shipbuilding is now a major priority. We have got them a 70,000 crore package for shipbuilding. Some of you will be aware of this. Our shipyards, which were almost half empty till a few years ago, all of them got at least 5 years worth of orders. One of them is in Kolkata, Garden Reach. which many people at one stage were saying which should shut it down. It's now massively profitable and they are doing very well, and so on. So we have emerged from a non-player. Idea is that in the next few years we become a major shipbuilding hub. We have all the ingredients. Shipbuilding is about steel. We are the world's second largest steel producer after China. We have shipbuilding capability. After all, we produce, nuclear submarines and aircraft carriers. I'm certain we can build oil tankers. Shipbuilding is basically a young man's job. So demographics is in our favor. And we have a long coastline. And yet today, 60% of all the ships being built on this planet today are actually, if you will be surprised to know, are being built in China, one country. 20% are being built in Korea, another 15% are built in Japan. The rest of the world combined will 5% and we build less than 1%. But I am telling you, within 5-6 years, we will become the fourth largest and become a major player. In 20 odd years, we will become a very serious player, maybe going past some of the others.
That's great, and actually this gives us a very important lesson. It's the way in which you think. That mindset that creates all the difference. So let me be a bit more sort of personal in terms of your professional experience.
And this have to be the last question, and I promised the gentleman there one question.
So this is
and then
actually the penultimate question, because we have one more question before we will wind up. So across the many reforms that you have participated in, and you have talked about the art, science and economics of reforms, which reform has taught you the biggest lesson? Maybe not the greatest success, but that fundamentally changed the way you could think.
Well, I'm a complexity theory man, so I am suspicious of any single point that suddenly changed everything. I have obviously been now in government for almost a decade. I'm otherwise a financial markets guy. I spent 22 years sitting on a trading floor as an economist working in financial markets. But certainly the last decade or so of being in government, and I've been through many things. Of the many situations that I have dealt with, I would say if you had to really single it down, it was not so much a reform, but the experience of managing 1.4 billion people through a shock like COVID.
Yeah. Agreed. Completely.
Unprecedented shock, no playbook, and a very difficult situation where we had to make all manner of choices, and none of those choices were good choices. And we are dealing with a virus where we don't know what's going on. I have, by the way, had to make, do meetings and even do press briefings and so on, while I myself had COVID and was running 102 fever. So one of the things that taught this is that, look, you can be as clever as you want, but you will eventually hit a situation where there are actually no possible answers at that time. In retrospect, you can say many things, but at that time, looking ahead, you are dealing with extremely chaotic situations and really standing through them. That really is important. So so yes, I can talk about policy, I can talk about everything else, but in the end, a lot of it eventually deals down to will and power, and the power of character. Willpower and character.
That really stood up, and I think that we were the nation which did exceptionally well amidst the great challenges of COVID and really transformed into many opportunities. Now to come back and possibly, before winding up, let us bring this conversation to home, our home, Bengal, to IIT Kharagpur, and possibly some of the shared future that all of us in our mind keep. The next Indian Renaissance. We think of IIT Kharagpur being the oldest IIT, and we feel that intellectually we should drive something. Bengal, for a long period of time, Bengal did not justify that intellectual spirit for which it has been known over the years. So why great institutions like IIT Kharagpur. Why Bengal? Why now, and what to do? What is your way forward?
So this is my hometown. As you know, I'm from Kolkata. And for half a century or so, we made certain policy and economic choices that essentially led to a half a century, I would say, of decline. And it just didn't happen in the economic space. It filtered through to every arena of area. So once the businesses shut down, the factories shut down, patronage for other activities, intellectual activities, even culture dried up. And so we went through this half a century of stagnation. I am a witness of it. Many of you here who are old enough will remember having gone through that phase of stagnation. The good news is that there is now a hope of a turnaround, but it is only an opportunity. It is what we make of that opportunity that matters. And it does mean that we bring back to Bengal a spirit of innovation, risk-taking, a spirit of adventure. 100 years ago, if you came to Kolkata and you looked for, the great intellectuals of that time, think of the greats that were here. You had writers and poets of the caliber of Rabindranath Tagore. You had political leaders of the caliber of Netaji Subhash Bose. You had Acharya Jagadish Chandra and other scientists. You had, business leaders from all over the country and the world. There was a large Armenian community here of businessmen. There were, of course, the Marwadis and Gujaratis. There were very famous, many people forget, Bengali businessmen of eminence at that time who built Calcutta Chemicals, Bengal Chemicals, Mohini Mills, and so on. So we need to bring back that spirit of risk-taking. And that means that we need to be willing to think out of the box. Do things that people say is crazy. And this is important for India as a whole, of course, but it is very important for Bengal to recapture its spirit. We need to find today's Rabindranath Tagore. We want to find today's Mihir Sen.
Who knows, some of them are sitting here in the audience. There are many young aspirants who are sitting here.
So as IIT Kharagpur, it is your job, so to speak, to find that talent and to use this facility, by the way, to give them an opportunity to shine. And yes, a lot of it will go wrong. But that is the point. Risk-taking means that a significant part of those out-of-box ideas will go wrong. So the way in which we deal with failure is a very important part of what we need to teach. So you need to banish this whole term, kichu hobe na, from our vocabulary.
And with that positive spirit, we have, of course, come towards the end of this conversation. Of course, there were many more points.
There was one gentleman who wants to ask a question.
Yeah, so we'll get into that question and then we'll formally wind up.
Yeah.
There is
so what was your question, sir?
Thank you for giving me that opportunity. My regards to you and also my regards to Professor Chakraborty. Actually, the kind of ecosystem, I'll take maybe 1 or 2 minutes.
You'll have to come to a question quickly.
Our company is Loonpop AI Solutions Private Limited. It's a DPIIT registered company and we are dealing with Makhana. And to develop the ecosystem, I tried to align AI, agriculture.
No, please come up with a specific question.
That question I am putting, sir.
Yeah.
So once I went into making that ecosystem, I found everywhere the kind of things you were telling. Maybe it is very small, but the same thing. Like I am going for CGSS, bankers are telling CGT MSc. I am going for new things, officers are not that way clear. Additional Chief Secretary sir also tried to help me. He called up that this machine is going to develop, but this will not work. Give me the status. And he was told, sir, IIT guys are seeing this, we can do everything. I told, sir, this will not work.
No, so this kichu hobe na problem is a very serious problem, as you can see. Live example.
Yeah,
so yes,
live
it's not a question really, it's an example.
No, my question is there,
Yeah.
sir. My question is, no one among us can solve your problem, the huge problem you are having and the challenges you are facing. But if you want, you can solve my problem.
Well, I don't know about your specific problem. I'll let IIT.
I will let you know.
No, please, I'll answer it. I can't get involved in specific questions which doesn't seem like a central government issue. So I am dealing with central government issues, and that is my
Yeah, I
area
think
of
that
intervention.
we can get into specifics, but it was a great day that half a day that we had. We started with something which many of us believed would be economics, but it went around everything. It was about imagination, about institutions, about the confidence of a civilization preparing for the next journey. And your lecture showed us how reforms happen, in summary. And the subsequent conversation has reminded us why reforms matter. They would happen, but why they matter. And on behalf of IIT Kharagpur, I would like to thank collectively on behalf of the institution for sharing not only your insights, but your optimism about our future, and from Nahi Yoga to Hoga, that approach. So friends, please join me once again in thanking Shri Sanjeev Sanyal with a warm round of applause. So now the fireside chat should get into fire in the belly, and we would draw a conclusion to this session.
What an extraordinary exchange of ideas. Thank you to both our speakers for such a rich, candid, dynamic and insightful discussion. Please join me once again for a big round of applause for Shri Sanjeev Sanyal and Professor Sumit Chakraborty for this brilliant session. May I now request our Honorable Director, sir, to felicitate Shri Sanjeev Sanyal with a token of appreciation. Our other dignitaries, Professor Siddharth Mukhopadhyay, Dean of Alumni Affairs, and our Head of the Department of Humanities and Social Sciences, Professor Jitendra Mahakud, are also requested to join. To formally conclude this segment of the event, I request our head, Professor Jitendra Mahakud, to propose the vote of thanks.
Okay. No, sir. We are really sincerely thankful to Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal, our member of Economic Advisory Council, Prime Minister, for his thought-provoking issue. And really, we are thankful to you, sir, because you have shown the way small change can a bigger kind of revolution in this economic and as well as other world. And our director has nicely summarized that thing, and we don't have, we are very shortly, we have to wind up the things. And we are very much thankful to our honorable director who has kind-heartedly helped to organize this particular event and entrusted this responsibility to all of us to make this particular event successful. We are really thankful to you, sir. We are also thankful to Professor Siddharth Mukhopadhyay, our Dean Alumni, and Dean Administration, and our Kharagpur Administration for facilitating this all kind of things to make this event possible. And our biggest thanks to our students who have traveled from Kharagpur to this place 6 o'clock in the morning with a lot of pain. We are really thankful to them. And all the students present over here from these universities in Kolkata, and the dignitaries, the faculty members, professors from all those universities in Kolkata, and as well as press people and the other dignitaries, our alumni in the Kolkata chapter, and as well as the people who are present over here from the industry, from the incubation center, and as well as we are really thankful to our Rajarhat Research Park Administration, Mr. Gupta, and as well as our Saurabh ji, who has kindly helped in many matters for organizing this event. I'm thankful to Abhrajit and Pratik Dama, who is our Chief of Staff of the Director and as well as our Public Relation Officer for facilitating the branding and all kind of activities. And last but not the least, I'm thankful to all the service units like Audiovisual Cell, NPTL team, and all those people who are basically involved in this particular event. Thank you very much again, and now we can close this session and wait for lunch. Thank you very much.